Hi guys, I think I'm live. All right. Hi everyone. Just going to do a quick introduction to the Aristotle text, and we'll pick it up again in a minute. So today we're starting our sort of proper ethical theory, uh, which is virtue ethics. And we're going to be looking at virtue ethics through Aristotle, sort of the original thinker of virtue ethics. Uh, so we will look at Aristotle's idea of virtue and how he differs from Plato. But first, I want to say a little bit about the difference between Plato and Aristotle. And so Aristotle was Plato's student. Aristotle's dates are 384 to 322 BC. Aristotle was Plato's student at the academy and went on to start his own school known as the Lyceum after completing his course at the academy and being the reader at the academy. Aristotle's job at Plato's school was to deliver the daily reading. It's not terribly important, except that it points to maybe where Aristotle gets his impressively comprehensive understanding and knowledge of pre-Socratic philosophy, his philosophy that came before Socrates, right, before Plato's texts. So Aristotle is Plato's student, an incredibly knowledgeable student. His nickname at Plato's academy was Nous, meaning mind. He was the star student. And in the history of philosophy, probably the two most important philosophers are Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle is of equal importance to Plato. But Aristotle's approach is very different. As we'll see in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle is critical of many of Plato's ideas. Above all, he's critical of the idea of the forms. And so I want to sort of, before we get into the details of the text, talk a little bit about sort of schematically the way that Aristotle is understood to be in opposition to Plato. And this takes us back to a topic in Plato that we didn't get to talk about as much as we should have, which is the topic of transcendence. Plato sets up these two realms of being. Right? We have the realm of forms and the realm of appearances. And the realm of forms, which is the realm of ideas, is the realm of truth and true reality. Right? The realm of appearances is derived from the realm of forms. The physical world is derived from the intellectual world. Right? In Plato's view, ideas are more real than appearances. It is the idea of a thing that makes the physical thing what it is. But this raises a major problem, which is the question of how it's possible that a form, a non-physical being, an idea, is able to have any purchase on the physical world. How can something non-physical be the cause of something physical? How can the non-physical be the foundation of the physical? How, more specifically, does a form cause, shape, and govern an appearance? So how does the idea of a table in fact form the reality of this particular table? What's the relation between an idea and a physical thing? Right? Plato has told us that this relation is one of causation. The idea is the cause of the thing. And right, we understand that there is a hierarchy between these two realms, in that the realm of forms is has priority over the realm of appearances. But what about their actual interaction? How does an idea come to actually be a cause in the physical world? And the answer to this is transcendence, right? That ideas are transcendental. And what we mean by transcendence, what Plato means by transcendence, is really not at all clear. Okay, so we say they're transcendent, that ideas transcend the realm of forms to enter into the physical realm of appearances. This idea of transcendence means, right, passing from one realm to another, transcending one realm, going from one world to another. So you can name it transcendence, but that isn't really an explanation of what is happening. And how can it really be that ideas actually do this work of creating the physical world? How are we to at least understand this? And Plato gives us two ways to think about transcendence. The first is he describes it as participation. So if we think of every table in the world and we assert that every table comes from the same ideal form, we might then say every table participates in the idea of a table, or every table is a part of the idea, the ideal of a table. And so this would be to sort of say, well, we can interpret this a number of ways. Right? To say that it participates, it means that maybe the matter, which is not really a Platonic term, it's more of an Aristotelian term, but that the actual physical material somehow takes part in the idea. Now, how that might work and how that is possible would involve a much longer discussion that we don't have time to get into. But at least we can think of this idea of participation, right? The physical world in some way participates. The transcendence is the participation of the material world in the ideal world, or vice versa, right? The participation of the idea in the physical world. Right? So participation implies kind of not collaboration, because that implies equal power, but I think rather if we think of the form as the kind of ruler, we could understand every example of the form as a kind of member of the government, right? The form is the king, and all of the members of the king's court participate in the court and the kingdom, but they don't make any decisions, right? They follow out the king's wishes. So we might understand it sort of in that sense. Another way we can understand it is to think that every example is a part of the ideal. That the ideal then could be understood as the sum total of all examples of that idea, all possible examples of that idea. So every table represents a part of the ideal table. And the ideal table would have an infinite number of parts, right? Any table will be a part of the ideal. And again, this doesn't really explain transcendence. It describes it in a way. All right, so that is the idea of participation. There's another way that Plato describes transcendence, which is less of a spatial metaphor, in the sense of parts to a whole, and is more a temporal metaphor. It refers to time rather than space. And I think that this is a better way to understand the relation between the ideal and the particular, universal and particular, form and example, form and appearance. Instantiation. First, we can think of this word instantiation in a different form. We could say that every example of a form, every particular table, is an instance of the form of a table, right? An instance of the form. An instance here means an example, right? But we could also then say that an instance, because it has this temporal element to it, we could say that an example is an instant of the form. And so every table is an instance, is an instant manifestation of that form. And the reason I like this description better is that it gets to what is really essentially the difference between form and appearance, which is the existence of time. So the forms are atemporal. They're outside of time. They are eternal. They're unchanging. Appearances are everything that happens in time. They come into being, they go out of being, they're in a constant state of change. Change can only happen over time. Moreover, everything that is in time is changing. So we can think of the idea of instantiation, an instance of a form, as the addition of time. That what sort of sets a form into the physical world, what allows a form to enter into the physical world, is time, is the addition of time, right? So the ideal form of table plus time gives us an instance of time. That by making the ideal temporal, we get an instance of the ideal. And so that the physical world then is time. And the things that exist in the physical world are temporalized forms. So I think that is my preferred way of thinking about transcendence. But as I said, right? There have been at least 2,000 years of debate on the meaning of transcendence and how transcendence works, if transcendence even makes any sense. And it's this last opinion that belongs to Aristotle. To Aristotle, the idea of transcendence doesn't make any sense. More generally, but maybe because of this, Aristotle thinks that uh, the whole schema that Plato has developed that separates being into the realm of forms and the realm of appearances is flawed, is wrong, incorrect. Right? There are not two realms to existence. There is only one realm. And it's not the case that form is transcendental and enters into the physical world. Rather, instead of transcendence, Aristotle posits a world of immanence. And immanence means that the reality of being is not found in some other world. It's not removed and independent of this physical appearing world, but rather reality is immanent, right? It is immediate. It is at hand, it is near. Reality is not in some other world, but right here around us. We live in the real world. We don't see a reflection of the real world. We don't live in the cave. And so, right, for Aristotle then, this means we have to rethink the entire idea of Platonic metaphysics, these two realms. And this, so one of the main things that comes out of this Aristotelian critique of Plato, the rejection of the realm of forms and the assertion of the immanence of being and reality, is the ground, the foundation on which Aristotle is going to begin his investigations. And it makes sense, then, this being Aristotle's assumption, that Aristotle will be one of the great ancient scientists. And in many ways, Aristotle is one of the origins of the natural sciences and the empirical sciences. If you believe that reality is not often some other world that's only available to thought, but that reality involves the physical world as much as it does the intellectual world, that reality is all around us, then you can learn about reality not just through reflection, through abstract theorizing, but also through empirical observation. Right? Empirical meaning experiential. Empiricism literally means of experience. I can learn about reality through my senses. Right? This is, I think, the sort of easy way to understand the key difference between Aristotle and Plato. We could make this a lot more nuanced, a lot more complicated, but in general, Plato believes that your senses do not give you any truth. Right? What your senses give you is an illusion, a shadow of reality. And you have to break through that shadow, that illusion, in order to reach reality through thought. Aristotle thinks you get as much reality through your five senses as you do through thinking. And you have to have both the empirical and the intellectual. For Aristotle, it is impossible for a form to exist without a material component. There is no independent realm of forms. A form requires the physical world to the same extent that the physical world requires the intellectual world. So, given that empiricism, observation are able to give us truth, give us some understanding, Aristotle takes empirical sciences much more seriously, and he is a scientist. He thinks of himself as a natural scientist. Above all, he regarded himself as a biologist. A marine biologist, in fact, was his specialty. Now, as a scientist, Aristotle gives us a number of foundational ideas. And the most important of these is the idea of a category. So just as Plato is the philosopher that sort of invents the idea of an idea, Aristotle is the thinker that invents a system of categories and who does science using categories, right? Uses science, scientific observation, in order to understand being and nature as a set of categories. And so breaking down the animals into species, breaking down plants into species, and in general, sort of organizing the world into these sets. And every category is going to have a definition, but it must also then have a physical manifestation. All right, so that's this general introduction of Aristotle. Let me say one more thing about Aristotle in general, or two more things that will prepare us for our reading. The first is Aristotle's definition of the human being, which is kind of scientific definition, categorization. Now, how to define the human being was a question that philosophers prior to Aristotle had been concerned with. Plato's definition of the human being famously was a bipedal, flightless, and featherless being. Right? That is what makes us unique in nature. We don't have feathers, we stand on 2 feet, and we can't fly. Right? There's no other being like that. Now, this is a kind of ridiculous and bad definition. It doesn't get to anything essential about what it means to be human. Aristotle gives us a better, more substantial definition. For Aristotle, we are the zoon, logon, echon, the animal that has logos. And logos here means, well, logos can be translated in a number of different ways. It's where we get our word logic from. But in ancient Greek, it meant right speech or a true account. So the human being is the being that is able to speak the truth, to give a true account of being. And this definition of the human being gets taken up by Roman philosophers, translated into Latin, where it becomes the animal rationale, or the rational animal. So maybe you've heard this before, right? The human being is the rational animal. That is an Aristotelian definition. What makes us the beings that we are, our essence and definition, lies in our ability to speak the truth, to use logos, to be rational. Now, I'll mention that Aristotle articulates this definition in a different way in other places, where he defines the human being not as the zoon logon eshon, but as the zoon politikon, the political animal. And I think that this is a very important point. And I'm taking this more or less from an essay by Hannah Arendt, who makes this argument nicely, where she argues that although it appears that these two definitions are different and at odds with each other, rational animal and political animal, in fact, they are the same. And Arendt makes this argument by saying, and I think she's absolutely right, that the logos, because in ancient Greek, it didn't refer to rationality in the sense that we might think of it as kind of abstract thought, but referred instead to literal speech, to dialogue, discourse, to talking. That to say we are the zoon logon eshon is the same as to say we are the zoon politikon, the political animal, because to speak the truth, to discuss the truth, to give a true account is necessarily to engage in discussion, to debate the truth with others, and that this is inherently political. So for Aristotle, the human being is the animal that has politics and discusses the truth. And discussing the truth is political, and politics means discussing the truth. Now, I think we will leave it here, and I will go into the details of the text in the next video. How is Aristotle going to critique Plato, and specifically critique Plato's idea of the good? What would a immanent conception of the good look like? How would we conceive of the good not as something transcendental that organizes the world from another realm, but which is immanent within this realm? The good as something that can be seen, can be experienced as it is in this world, a kind of scientific view of the good. All right, so back soon.